Hi, Orla.
Hi. Oh, you stopped the video.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and absolutely delighted to have you with us for this webinar. Joining us this evening is Orla Shortall and Chris Harrap. So I will just explain a little bit about who they are and why they're with us. Just to let you know that I am having some internet issues this evening, but hopefully I've got multiple devices set up, so you should be able to enjoy the webinar uninterrupted. But yeah, I might be trying to fix things in the background. So apologies if there are any problems, and hopefully if there are, we'll get them resolved as quickly as possible. So just to give you a quick overview, as I said, we're joined this evening by Orla and Chris. So Orla is a researcher based at James Hutton Institute. She has a multidisciplinary social science background and an interest in decision-making and governance within agriculture. Her work currently focuses on livestock, particularly the role of grass and grazing in dairy production, antimicrobial use in calf care and managing livestock disease. And Orla enjoys interdisciplinary collaboration with social and natural scientists. And Orla very kindly came and spoke to the PFLA research group a little while ago, which is how we sort of know about her work and have been following the publication of the report that came out of her most recent research, which she's going to be talking about this evening. Also joining us is Chris. So Chris Harrap is the estate manager at J&E Dickinson, which is a Yorkshire-based dairy business which owns Longley Farm Dairy and Tyershall Farm. He's a chartered surveyor with a strong interest in architecture and psychology, but has recently completed a Nuffield farming scholarship studying the design of livestock housing and its impact on farmer well-being, promoting a nature-inspired design approach to meet needs of both humans and animals. And Chris now advocates for a return to mixed farming systems and pasture-fed livestock, and seeing grazed animals as a vital tool to maintaining soil health in a rotation of annual crops grown for people, with meat or milk as a byproduct. And he believes that grazing livestock belong on every farm, with numbers, breed and grazing management tailored to suit each farm's circumstances, which I'm sure we're going to hear more about as we progress. So we will crack on, I think. So I think Orla is going to start with us. And so Orla, I don't know if you need to share your screen. But
yeah.
hopefully you should be able to.
Okay, yeah, I have a PowerPoint here. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry, I'll just put it on slideshow. Okay. So yeah, feel free to start asking me questions in the middle. I won't be able to see any typed questions. We can answer them afterwards. Apologies if there's background noise. There's a grumpy puppy here who's had a medical procedure and still recovering. Like Nikki said, I work in the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen. I'm a social scientist. My interest is in how decision making happens and the influence of different systematic factors on agriculture, like policies, markets, culture. So I'll present on this fellowship, Cows Eat Grass, Don't They, that I worked on for 3 years. So it was funded by the British Academy, which is a body that funds arts and social science research in the UK. And like Nikki said, I presented, I think, a lot of the results in November. So this is a more condensed version, some of the work that overlaps with Chris's interest. And if there's anything else you want to ask about, feel free to. So just about the background of the project, I wrote the proposal in 2015-16 when I was working in the University of Nottingham Vet School, and I was reading at the time about the vision for a grass-based system in Ireland post the removal of EU milk quotas in 2015. So there's a report there in the picture by 2 Irish industry stakeholders, and the project was comparing the UK and Ireland, but I'll present just the UK results here, but this is kind of explanation of where the interest came from. So in Ireland, this report was about the potential for the grass-based system to deliver with the huge expansion. The government had a target of increasing milk production by 50% in 5 years. And they thought through the grass-based system that could keep profits with farmers, could be environmentally friendly, could be good for animal welfare. And they saw grass as really, really key to that. And that contrasted quite strongly with what I was coming across in the UK, where at the University of Nottingham Vet School was an indoor dairy farm. I didn't see as much discourse about the importance or value of grass and the sort of potential of grass to remove farmers from a treadmill of production where they're locked into increasing but not always making more money or not always having better working lives. So I was really interested in why Ireland had this discourse around grass that the UK didn't. If the kind of promise about the Irish system would come to fruition, and what views were in the industry in the UK about grass-based higher feed input and indoor systems. And because the question of indoor dairy farming was seen to be sort of an issue of the public objecting to cows being inside all year round, whereas within the industry it was seen as normal from the people I spoke to. So I wanted to know more about that. Is it really sort of an industry versus public kind of issue? What are views of people within the industry on indoor dairy farming? So there's a lot of questions there. I'll address some of those. So, and just to explain about the Irish system briefly, you might be aware of this, or you might look to some of the research in Ireland. So in the 70s and 80s, I think in Ireland, they started feeding more concentrate and increasing yields like elsewhere in Europe. But the advisory body Teagasc in Ireland, who are funded by farmers, by the government, by research funding, they were influenced by researchers in New Zealand, and they saw the potential for implementing a sort of New Zealand style system in Ireland. But the implementation of quotas in Ireland meant it couldn't increase to the size of the sector in New Zealand. So sorry, there's a lot of whining in the background. He'll settle down shortly. So they promoted this grass-based system, which was seen to keep profits with farmers because it was low cost. And the message I heard was that advice became more privatized in other countries. In Ireland, Teagasc, the advisory services, don't sell anything. They don't make any money from grass. So that was why Ireland went a different direction to the UK, given they have quite similar geography, climate, not similar markets. But now I'll switch back to the UK question. So the methods then for the fellowship were a survey with farmers in Scotland. And so I think I presented on the survey results from the UK last time, but I had a lot more responses from Scottish dairy farmers compared to dairy farmers in the rest of the UK, because I got contact details from the Scottish government. Because of the Hutton, we have a close working relationship with the Scottish government. So I posted the survey out to Scottish farmers, and I just disseminated through social media, etc., to the rest of the UK. So I've submitted a paper just with the Scottish survey results. So I interviewed people, volunteered to be interviewed in the survey. I interviewed 21 farmers operating different types of systems around GB. I intended to interview farmers in Northern Ireland, but I couldn't go there with COVID, and I could have done it on video, but I already had quite a lot of data at that point. And I was finding interesting differences between the countries in the UK, but I couldn't, that was kind of beyond the scope of the project to compare the 4 countries in the UK. So I interviewed 25 key stakeholders in the UK. So people from government, academia, dairy industry, sort of mainstream and also organic, PFLA, sort of more alternative sectors of the industry as well, charities, and analysed documents from those sources as well. And I did the same work again in Ireland. So if you want to hear more about the Irish one, let me know. So in relation to how is grass or grazing seen in the UK, and what's the view of indoor farming, from the key stakeholder interviews, the message from conventional stakeholders in government, industry, academia was very, very much that systems differences in terms of how, whether you class it as a grass-based system, an organic spring calving grass-based system, the type of system PFLA would do, versus a higher feed input versus an indoor. Those differences didn't really matter for economic, environmental, or animal welfare outcomes. So this academic, this is a illustrative quote: "What makes a system work or not is the attention to detail within the system. So I think we can have umpteen pointless discussions about whether we should have a spring calving grazing system or a house system, I actually think that's not the question. I think the question is, you form your overall system with a whole series of things in mind. What does the milk buyer want? What are your grass growing conditions like? How many cows have you got? So this was very much the response I got, that it's sort of it's a false question to compare systems on economic, social, environmental, animal welfare grounds, because the differences within systems are much bigger than the differences between systems. And that's not sort of based on, well, the economics, there is evidence, there is research about that. But the rest was, I don't think that it's not really backed up, because I don't think that type of research is really done, well, environmental as well to some extent on certain parameters. But it was more kind of a philosophy that everyone adhered to. And it was just very, very different to what I was hearing in Ireland, that the grass-based system, which isn't the PFLA system, it's an intensive grass-based system, that was the future, and anything else was ill-advised. So there was just such different messaging coming out. And they make sense politically. There's a huge plethora of different types of dairy systems in the UK. So for organisations, academics, the government to favour one over the other is problematic, because they would offend a certain section of the farming community, or they would cut off resources, or any of these other reasons. Whereas in Ireland, the grass-based system is operated by the majority of farmers. So, and I think, I think it seems quite innocuous, people here might have sympathy with that view, and it sort of intuitively makes sense. And I think it could be used as kind of that sort of, it could be used in different ways, but I think it was also used as a way to close down sort of discussion about systems. And I asked questions about grass-based labels, and a lot of the key stakeholders from conventional routes said they thought it was maybe a false message, because given this view that system differences don't matter for different types of outcomes, having a label that differentiates based on grazing or not grazing doesn't provide useful information. So I think, it could be an innocuous sort of, farms are hugely different, outcomes vary from farm to farm, that makes intuitive sense, but it could also be a way to shut down the possibility of differentiating. So in the report I wrote, I tried to open that back up and talk about ways in which system differences did matter to people. So a comparison of the dominant discourses in Ireland and the UK is published in that paper, which is on the website without a paywall if you're interested. So, and then the farmer survey, just reporting here on the Scottish responses, and I was really happy with the response rate. It was about 26% of all Scottish dairy farmers. There aren't that many, 900 Scottish dairy farmers. And so I asked a question, a statement, cows should have access to pasture for part of the year, and people could strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, strongly disagree. And I was expecting, given that sort of discourse in the industry, I was expecting maybe a third of people to strongly agree or agree that cows should have access. So it was higher than I expected. There was a majority preference among Scottish respondents for cows to graze. So there you can see it's 68% strongly agree. And animal welfare is better if cows graze. Well, yeah, a reviewer pointed out how access to pasture isn't the best way to word that, which I do agree with. But I don't think it invalidates the findings. But if I could do it again, I would say graze as opposed to not graze. But 51% thought welfare was better, which again I was quite surprised at. But there's a gap there, so it suggests there's something going on beyond welfare. Animal welfare is better if cows are housed. Very small proportion, 15% agreed or strongly agreed, and then 82% agreed or strongly agreed that stock keeping skills are more important than type of system for welfare. So that goes back to the industry view, which, and that's a really strong 82%. But I think those two things are often seen as opposed. Either you think systems differences don't matter and stock keeping facilities, these type of individual metrics are more important, or you have a preference for cows to graze. Whereas in the survey, these two things coexisted, which I thought was interesting. So then in the interviews, I looked into more, why did farmers hold the view they did? And there wasn't really, some farmers said, I don't agree with indoor dairy farming, I think it's wrong, but they were really in the minority. There wasn't, and that's kind of the discourse from in the media and from charities, that indoor dairy farming is factory farming. And there was, you know, some people did agree with that, some farmers, but most overall sort of a preference for grazing was more about their own experience. Farmers who graze liked grazing their cows, which I don't think is really, to me, that's not so much being discussed in the broader debate about farming systems. So this farmer said, we like being grazing farmers. We like having our cows outside. We prefer to see them outside than in the shed. We've got a really good grazing platform, and we really like to see the cows out at grass. You know, it's a personal preference really, and I wouldn't ever want to be in a situation where I couldn't do that. So it is framed as a personal preference and not as an ethical judgment. But it was quite among the interviewees, this was something that came up a lot. And I think so that kind of experience of grazing with their cows was really important to people. And the reasons for that were related to the change in seasons, seeing the experience for the cows, working outside, kind of identity as someone who works outside. So I like the countryside, I like the noise from the birds, I like the growth, I like the cows going out. That's the number one thing. So again, that's the cows going out is connected to their experience of being outside and connected to the change of season when the growth starts and when you hear the birds more. So it was connected to their practices of working outside and being someone for whom the change in season makes a huge difference. And among the indoor farmers I spoke to, none of them really said none of them said I miss grazing. They still saw their work as outdoor work, I think. So so there wasn't kind of a binary there. So I've recently spoken to someone else and interviewed someone else for a different project who did say they miss grazing, but it wasn't their choice to. So I think there is something there about choice as well, and kind of seeing through the path that you've chosen. I'd be really, really disappointed if our cows were in all the time, because I like having them outside. I just like that part of it, to get out there in the field with them, and especially on, you can't beat a nice sunny day, going and getting the cows in. So again, their experience of working with the cows is connected to their experience of, and this is sees overlap with Chris's work, the psychological benefits and different types of benefits of working outside and the experience that gives people. And in wider debates, I think in the media, outside is framed as natural and inside as less natural. And that, to some extent, that was, a few farmers talked about that. It's no different to us getting in touch with nature, is it? We don't all have to do it all the time, but being out in a green space and in the fresh air and the sun does us the world of good. So I don't think that's a huge leap of faith to think it might be doing the same for dairy cows. So the type of work I do, this isn't offering evidence about the welfare benefits or not of grazing or not grazing. It's about how farmers frame it. So here, it's outside it's common experience for them and the cows. Working outside is seen as really beneficial and healthy and good for them, and the same for cows. So I think in the wider debate, it's often framed as cows are grazing animals, so it's natural for them to graze. But here, it's not. Grazing isn't good for them because they're grazing animals. It's good for them because they're living beings, and being outside is seen to be good for a living sentient mammal like us. So there's an overlap in the two types of experience. And grazing or not grazing wasn't seen as it wasn't seen as kind of black and white. It was seen as something that the cows have a preference for within the routine on the farm. It's not like they're wild animals where they always want, like, it's not like they're a caged wild rabbit that just always wants to, escape the boundaries of where they're imprisoned. It was very much cows understand the routine on the farm and they want to graze within an understanding of that routine. So again, this isn't about evidence about cows' preferences or about cow welfare. It's about the framing of that by farmers. So this story was told lots of times. I don't know whether it's the sunshine or whether it's the increase in temperature or whether they can smell the grass. I have no idea. But if you open the door at the bottom of the shed, even if you're just going out to see the slurry store or something, they'll just all come to the gate and start to roar. They just know. Dad used to stay in Ireland. We used to stock graze, and he used to carry the fence post across the yard. They could hear the post clattering. As soon as they heard that, they started roaring. So at a particular time of year, when the cows sense that seasons have changed and they can smell the grass, or they can see it, or they can feel the change in temperature, then they start desiring to go out. So farmers framed the cow's desire as contingent on the weather and what they understand as the routine on the farm. They can tell the signals that they might be going outside. So, and farmers kind of framed their own preferences for being outside within that as well, that they liked being outside in the good weather and the bad weather. They could take or leave it. So again, there was kind of a commonality between how farmers described their own experiences of being outside and how farmers described the cows' experiences. And I think people seem to like understand having a sense of that agency and the being able to communicate with the cows. And they sort of, some of them, there was a sense that they almost felt proud of the cows, that the cows were outdoor animals. They said, I don't understand these Holsteins that stay inside all year round and wouldn't go outside if you open the gate and let them. So there was something about identity as well. They're outside people, their animals are outside animals. But I don't think this sort of aspect of grazing or not grazing is talked about. So in conclusion, I think possibly farmer views aren't fully mirrored in industry debates about grazing. So the idea that systems differences don't matter for economic, welfare, environmental, social reasons, again, you can see that was really strongly put forward in the survey. 82% agreed with that in relation to stock keeping and welfare. And there was another question about economics, and again, it was 83%. So that was really, that was kind of, people voiced that in the interview as well as a way not to criticize other farmers. But there was also ways that systems differences do matter. And aside from sort of economics or environment or animal welfare, it was very much about people's own experience and the benefits for them, their meaning that they get out of working with animals, their identity. So it's kind of, in the wider debate, it's seen as the public want grazing labels. And there was, like I said, by the industry stakeholders, there was some kind of negativity towards grazing labels because they saw it as maybe misinforming an already misinformed public. But the interviews I did is not representative, so I can't generalize this to all farmers. But a lot of people I spoke to who grazed, there was a positive feeling about potential for labels because they liked grazing. If it gave them an extra income, they didn't interpret it as a critique of indoor dairy farming the way maybe industry stakeholders did. And so it wasn't that the public like grazing, the industry understand it's more nuanced. There was other stuff going on. Farmers who grazed really enjoyed grazing. And this maybe isn't talked about so much. So yes, I'll stop there. And if you've questions, maybe I can do that whenever Nikki is planning, either now or after Chris speaks.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Orla. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, and I've got a question as well. So maybe we could ask those, and then we'll move on to Chris. And just a reminder to everyone who's joined us this evening that if you would like to ask a question, then please do use the Q&A box, and we'll pick those up as we go through. So there was a question just in terms of your sample. Malcolm wants to know, did you interview any farmers that milk their cows outdoors all year?
No, I didn't. In the survey, 4% of respondents kept their cows out all year round, but I didn't manage to interview any of those.
Brilliant, thank you.
Actually, sorry, at the time I spoke to one guy, I think it was in December, and his cows, he was trialing feeding them kale in the winter. But that was a trial. It wasn't something he does every year, and he was a bit skeptical of it.
Okay, and Bill Grayson has asked, how representative of the livestock sector as a whole are the views of dairy farmers likely to be?
So do you mean how representative are the views of the dairy farmer interviewees of other dairy farmers? Is that the question?
I think more broadly in terms of the livestock sector. So, and I think maybe, and Bill, do resubmit your question if I'm getting this wrong, but I think where what you've identified is that, for example, graziers like grazing. Do you think that that's probably likely to be relative across the sector in terms of beef and sheep farmers? They're going to be positive way that they do things.
Okay. Oh, right. Yeah. So, yeah, the project was focused on dairy, and I know PFLA have more beef and sheep members. I would imagine so. And yeah, I don't see any reasons why it would be just specific to dairy farmers. I think the aspects of lifestyle, why you keep farming, what you prioritize in your work, I think those were all things that fed into why people had the views that they do, and that would be true as well of beef and sheep farmers. Yeah, with industry views, I don't know how that would differ within the beef and sheep sector, but yeah, I think definitely, yeah.
Thanks, Orla. And just one more question, which I suppose is linked, is that what do you think this means for us in terms of, or what does it mean for the sector in terms of behaviour change? So we talk a lot about how one potential future plan for agriculture could be more of an agroecological approach, and integrated farming, but what you found suggests that, as I said, graziers like grazing, or people are kind of embedded into and positive about their own practice. So do you have any thoughts on what that means for kind of behavior change, or shifting people to a different system if they're kind of really wedded to what they're doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think maybe changing the language that's used to discuss the benefits of different systems. Often the language is around economics, environment, animal welfare, which are really, really important issues. But I think using language of what people enjoy about their work, and mental health and meaning and identity, I think those things maybe are seen as kind of softer or less, you can't attach numbers to them or metrics, but they're what drive people's choices and life choices, and they're the really core things. So I think widening the discussion to talk about, well, what do you get pleasure from in your job, and what gives you meaning in your job, and how could that be, how could different practices amplify that meaning, or what would be the change of that meaning if you took on different practices and identities. And there's research that sort of values can lag behind sort of changes. There's research that people might change to organic for economic reasons, and then they start thinking in a more environmental sort of way. So the reasons people make decisions aren't straightforward. But I think, I think in terms of, and I think something I didn't touch on was, and maybe that came up more in the Irish data, was the Irish dairy farmers are under a huge amount of pressure at the moment from the public and from the government about their environmental impacts, because there was sort of promised that expansion wouldn't be environmentally damaging, and then it proved to be quite environmentally problematic. So, and I think that really weighed on them. So I think change isn't for someone else. Maybe change is a way to align what how you see yourself and how you would like to be seen with what you do as well. So Irish farmers, the Irish farming organizations have become quite defensive and dug in their heels and said, no, we are environmentally friendly. But so I think, changing to actually bring that about, rather than feeling you need to just constantly defend and are under attack. And one more thing, I think agriculture and sort of identities can be quite siloed. So, people would see themselves as conventional farmers. I'm not part of an alternative group, or they have an identity as someone who resides in a particular sector of farming. So I think finding ways to mean that practices appeal to different groups for different reasons. Some people will be environmentally motivated. So tapping into what it is that people are motivated by, and not trying to convince them to be motivated by something in particular. Not everyone needs to, and that's quite vague. But yeah, hopefully you're nodding, so you understand what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. There's so many challenges there around kind of perceptions of self and how people want to be seen and how they do perceive themselves, and what other actors within the sector are supplying in terms of messages and validating certain practices. So I think it's a really complex issue. And Bill has just said in the chat that he thinks it's much harder to make decisions on personal ethical reasons when your business is struggling financially, and if you're trying to think about paying the bills. There's some other questions that have come in, but what we'll do is leave those for now. We'll come back to them at the end, if that's okay. So I'd really like to be able to hand over to Chris, who's going to talk about his experience of undertaking, well, not necessarily the experience of the Nuffield scholarship, but his findings. So Chris, if I can pass over to you, that would be great, and we'll pick some of the questions up at the end. And please do keep submitting your questions as Chris is speaking.
Let's see if I can you see that? Ooh, can you see that, Nikki? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just come out now.
How do I move that? I can't. The bar is blocking me from putting slideshow, as in the bar's at the top in the way. Any ideas?
Which?
See if I can. I'll figure it out. Yeah. So, okay. Can you see that first picture?
Yes, perfect.
We shape our buildings. So this is a bit of a niche topic, and I appreciate it might be a bit of an unusual one for PFLA, but I think a lot of you listening will be pleased with some of my conclusions, and hopefully some of it, although I've gone out on a limb to look into this in terms of livestock housing, I've come to some conclusions that some of you will share, and maybe some will disagree. And it's been really interesting, and I just want to take you on the journey of what I learned and the theory behind it, and hopefully some of that will kind of add to what Orla's been saying, particularly in relation to people and animals' need for nature and interactions with nature. So I'm just going to start with a few questions. First one is, which of these offices would you prefer to work in, and why? Can you see the next slide okay?
Next slide hasn't come up yet. Oh yeah, there we go. It's just there.
Which of these pig farm buildings looks the most pleasant as a working environment, and why? And then lastly, when it comes up, which of these dairy farm sheds would you like to walk into every morning, and why? And I think what I'm here to talk about really is the buildings that we live and work in profoundly affect us in all kinds of ways. And the point of my study was to understand why we feel good about some buildings and negative about others, and what makes a good working environment for a farmer, and how we can make sure our livestock buildings are really positive spaces in which they're good for our mental health. That's a big issue for farmers. And so I'm just going to talk you through three things today: how buildings make us feel and why, some general overview of modern livestock housing design, just a bit of a critique of it, and some innovative examples. And then just to ask ourselves, which was really the culmination of my journey, is this a question of building design, or is there something bigger going on here that makes us question the types of building we have and such? So the first thing I did was to step away from farming completely and find out how people feel about the spaces that they spend their time in, and why. And that involved a bit of a rabbit hole into psychology, design, architecture, neuroscience. And the main message I got was you really need to interact with nature. And there's a lot of benefits, cognitive and bodily benefits from doing so, but particularly psychological well-being benefits. And the word that describes this need is called biophilia. And in reality, it's about the fact that we all came from nature. We used to live in natural surroundings, and And even though we live in kind of a more built up environment, even if it's just a farmhouse, we still have a desire and a need deep in our biology to interact with the natural world. And as we know, traits that are within our biology and our genetics are very long lasting. And yeah, so we have those needs kind of deep within us, and they haven't changed in the relatively short period that we've put ourselves inside man-made structures. So the top right-hand picture in this slide illustrates a concept called prospect and refuge. And we like to see what's in front of us, where we can, originally from when we're trying to figure out where to gather fuel for our fire, we like to know what wolves were coming to attack us, where we could catch something to eat. And because we only have a certain pan of vision, a certain angle of vision in front of us and to slight peripheral vision to the sides, we like to know that we're safe from behind. And that instinct embodied in that image goes right back to when we sheltered at the mouth of caves, but it also influences now why we choose where we do to sit in restaurants. Typically, we like to sit against a wall of some kind with a good view of our surroundings and other people. Nobody likes sitting with their back to the door with people coming in behind them. So we're used to seeing lots of other things in nature, so kind of complex things. We're used to seeing fractals in the top left. Best example is a fern of repeat patterns, complex patterns of light, water, shadow, and movement of constant movement of things like trees swaying in the wind or water or whatever. So we're used to all these things. And having learned about all that biophilia, in practical terms, what's actually happening with that is that in the fairly forward-thinking architects and designers in other sectors like schools, hospitals, offices, are all designing buildings to try and think of how they can enable the people within those spaces to have views outside to nature, natural light and ventilation, use of natural materials, colours, patterns, ideally incorporating kind of the curves and shapes that we see in nature in the building structure, rather than a simple straight lines and angles. And all this is called biophilic design, and it's making a real difference to the people who use these type of buildings. So you've got like children performing better at school, office staff being more focused, happy and productive at work. You've got hospital patients recovering more quickly from illness. The middle picture on this particular slide is the neurosurgery recovery suite at Boston General Hospital, where they're finding that people recover from brain surgery quicker when they're able to look out on a garden. So this is real, practical, measurable stuff. It's not something which is a nice to have or something frivolous. It's really important that we design spaces that are good for us. What about the farmers' working environment? Well, the good news is that farmers traditionally, and a lot of you on this call have been fortunate to have one of the best working environments of any profession, really. And obviously working on land has its challenges, especially in the winter, but it might be a good reason why a lot of people in farming have chosen that particular life. There's another side to all this, which is that in recent times, market pressures and our rearing systems have all kind of evolved to focus on production efficiency, and there's lots of farmers who have quite a different working environment, and none of this is a criticism of them or our production systems, but just as other sectors are kind of focusing more on how to improve working environments, we also as farmers and as a whole industry really from the food giants downwards have responsibility to make sure those buildings are good for people and to attract new entrants to the industry apart from anything else. And I've wondered for a while whether the design of some of the more intensive indoor spaces and the working day of those farmers is in any way kind of linked to mental health crises that we're seeing in farming. And I am convinced that this is an issue and that this isn't just about financial pressures or succession planning or the various other stresses that farmers are under, I do think it's something to do partially with the working environments that some of them have. And I would just say that on my Nuffield travels, there were 4 farmers that I spoke to who cried talking about this as an issue. So there's something that needs thinking about here, and all these people, including all the people on this call, deserve to have a good working environment. If we just look at, general modern livestock housing, all of this has evolved, obviously very, very understandably, to be practical, low maintenance, easy to clean and disinfect, very durable, ideally low cost, or certainly cost efficient. And it's ended up being a fairly typical steel portal frame shape, similar in appearance to industrial properties. I used to value a lot of industrial warehouses, workshops, distribution centres in my previous life as a surveyor, and a lot of them look very similar to this. And generally made from man-made materials, obviously plastic, steel, concrete, fibre cement. But if we actually apply what we've learned from the design perspective, a lot of these building shapes are straight lines and angles. Some have good natural light, some have more electrical LED lighting. There's a lot of man-made materials present, although some are better colours psychologically, cognitively than others. And it's really great to see in some of them natural materials like timber. Straw in a building always looks better in terms of your experience of that building cognitively. But yeah, surfaces tend to be stark and simple. It's clearly a man-made structure. And the big one is some are open-sided, some are very enclosed. And as we've focused on increasing efficiency of livestock production, the buildings have become more enclosed and separate from the natural world. And that is in direct conflict with the design aspirations that we learned earlier. Just moving on to some innovative designs that I saw on travels. Can you see this slide now, Nikki?
We've still got the slide with the multiple buildings.
Some innovative designs.
No, haven't got that one yet.
Should be coming. It's to do with all the side of the photos. Anyway, it'll come up. There's some buildings that I saw on my travels, and the title of that slide is Some Innovative Designs. And effectively, it was really interesting to see there was a lot more timber structures than I expected. This is Netherlands, Germany, Canada, and USA. Some really interesting round buildings. And the building on the top right of that slide, has it come up yet? Is
yeah, we've got it now.
You've got it, yeah. Is indoor planting as well. That's actually a pig shed in the Netherlands called the Varkenshof, or pig garden. So a lot of tensile fabric roof as well, and some really interesting structures there, and excellent examples of how curved shapes, natural light, natural materials, views outside, and even indoor planting can make those spaces feel better. What these all have in common is they're not focused on creating a climate-controlled environment to sort of precision manage livestock. They're more of a shelter. And that leads me on to a big question, which was a bit of a light bulb moment, excuse the cheese. I had a meeting in New York with a guy called Professor Rich Wenner, a lovely guy, and he's a professor of prison design psychology. He designs carceral spaces for rehabilitation purposes in the USA and internationally. And Rich told me something where he said, the design of a prison is heavily influenced by what the designer sees a prisoner to be. I'm trying to secure a dangerous person here to protect society from them, or is this someone who is capable of being rehabilitated and reintegrated in society, and I need to look after them and somehow allow them to fulfill, a good potential rather than the negative road they've gone down. And that will massively influence those design. And it is the same with our livestock housing. And it's, are we trying to provide shelter here for when they can't be on fields, or are we trying to produce them as efficiently as possible? And we have to ask that question first, because if you're trying to design a completely climate controlled indoor environment to produce very efficiently, it is going to be in conflict with something that is healthy for people, because it's all about excluding natural influences like the light and the sun and the rain and the frost and all the things which we and our livestock enjoy, because those are our natural elements that we have originated from. In my view, I think that we fundamentally need a return to mixed farming systems where we coordinate livestock, soils and crops in a circular way. And in my opinion, and it's my personal opinion, that means putting animals back on land and managing in the right way, and putting animals, the right breed of animals, the right number of animals suited to our farm. And none of this needs to be old-fashioned or inefficient. We are an amazing species in so many ways, and we've got tunnels under seas for trains, and we've split the atom, and we've been to the moon. We're a very capable species, but we need to understand, we need to focus that ingenuity on trying to figure out natural cycles, to understand them better, and to be more clever with technology in order to enhance that. So effectively, if you can use a drone to save you time walking a field, to suss out where the infertile spots are, or the wet spots or whatever, then great, that's a very good use of technology. But developing something which makes natural elements or cycles redundant or replaces them, I'm not so sure about. So the future to me is a humble acknowledgement of nature and the resources it can give us, but using our own science and technology to harness it better, and creating tools in order to do that. So cattle aren't just beef, they're a fertilizing and mowing machine that converts grass, which we can't eat, into protein, which we can. And pigs aren't just pork, they're also a rooting machine, which are very good at digesting waste. So there's a lot to think about there. Lastly, if we're thinking about doing that, then firstly, we can provide lots of natural shelter with trees and hedges. Silver pasture has multiple benefits, obviously, and these are all kind of structures with zero carbon footprint to build them. They're helping to fight climate change. They're giving animals shelter and the browse that they need. They can also be coppiced, felled. We can sell credits of biodiversity net gain from them. That living structures have a great deal of wisdom to them if you can do it. Secondly, we can use portable shelters, and we already have these on some farms, but I think with some outside design input, you could really make these much more clever, more portable, more efficient in the way or the cost or whatever. And where we do need to build permanent buildings, I think, let's make them beautiful structures. Standardize our shed design. There's no reason why we can't, create something which is beautiful and easily replicable. And outside, that we're talking about places that are much better spaces for us to work in, for our animals to live in, and that look really appealing to sort of fellow citizens that we're trying to, proudly show our farms to. And we want to feel free to do that. So we've seen some really innovative livestock buildings earlier from Travels, and outside farming, there's some really incredible stuff happening in architecture and construction. There's people looking at structures in new ways and trying to build stronger structures using less materials. Some of them are using what we call biomimicry, where they copy like spider web design or other shapes and forms which naturally occur, which tell us what is an efficient way of building something. It has evolved to that over millions of years. then you've got a lot of stuff going on, like computer modeling to design complex, curved, beautiful structures in timber, and the software can help us fabricate the component parts of those, producing buildings in kit form. It could be open source for people to just get printed. So there's some really exciting stuff happening. And although a lot of the pictures on this page maybe look impractical in terms of having some pigs giving them hell, I'm completely convinced that if you do up to, say, 2 meters in something robust, up to 2 meters high, the actual structure above which covers that space can be something very, very different to what we build now. And it can be beautiful, it can be sustainable, it can be something quite magical. And, like what Orla said, if you hypothesize that people, people came from natural surroundings, and that's why we have an outright need to interact with nature, it's not a great leap to suggest that that's what our animals need as well. The hypothesis should apply in the same theorem. So I hope that gives a good overview. And just in summary, the key messages are: the look and feel of our working environment profoundly affects us. Do not underestimate that. It can have a profound effect on mental health. And there are studies done on people working, doing examination papers in white, perfectly lit, perfectly heated rooms and collapsing after 24 hours. We need the natural world, and we need to interact with that. And I know that a lot of the people on this call will be really proud of their working environment and really enjoy it for that very reason. So you're already a long way there. Farmers deserve a good working environment, a good place for animals to live, and somewhere that we're proud to show other people. And it should be a binary thing of this shed is bad or whatever. Why are we here? How have we got here? And how can we improve this situation? And if that means that arable farms have to have livestock on them again, in a rotational way as part of a rotation, a Clifton Park farming system, lay rotation, for example, then so be it. There's something to be said for that. Successful building design starts with the right ethos for the activity within. My view is we should be building a shelter, not a production facility, and that animals should be part of a symbiotic coordination with soils and crops on our farms, a land management partner as well as a product. And lastly, we don't have to stick to the norm. We do build fairly standardized structures, but that's the way that things have gone. But we don't need to continue down that. There's a lot of emerging architecture which can make different types of structures very affordable. And so long as they're robust at ground level where the animals are, they can still be very durable and long lasting. Thanks for listening, and I hope that was interesting. And if anyone wants to email me any questions, it's chris@tyershallfarm.com, or you can also follow me on Instagram, just Chris_Harrap. Thanks very much. Okay, Nikki.
Chris, thank you so much. That was fascinating, and some of the images you showed of the kind of more innovative and beautiful livestock housing shelter was really inspiring. There was particularly one, I think, that had I guess branches or twigs or something like wattle and daub, but without the daub maybe, that looked really interesting and had that kind of same feeling as being in woodland. So yeah, it's really interesting. What you were saying. We do have a question from Bill, and then I've got a question of my own. Bill's asked about wood chip corrals, and that there was a lot of interest in them a few years ago, and I think there's a number of farmers who are still using this. So have you got any thoughts, Chris, on how those would rate in terms of visual or other aesthetic qualities, and as well in your experience kind of linking that through to animal welfare and health?
Anything that's built out of natural materials is a good thing, in my opinion. And I think There's various other things to think about, obviously, practically, like disease risk and practicality and such. But I think effectively, we as a species, all species that came from natural environments, including our pigs and cows and all the rest of it, we're very comfortable with complex looking things. We need complexity. When we sit inside white rooms, we struggle with that, because if you look out of your window and actually think at how complex everything you're looking at is, with leaves on trees or hedges or whatever, it's all extremely complicated to look at, and we feel comfortable with that. So straw, I think that's why straw, OSB board, wood chip, we like the look of it, because we sort of feel comfortably overawed with its complexity. So I think visually that's a really good thing. If you can you make it work practically? And then there's people talking about things like green barns and such out there. So yeah, I think, yeah, good idea.
Brilliant. I want to come back to a word you used quite a lot, which is beautiful, and how interesting that is. And kind of, I was immediately thinking about those links between what you were talking about and Orla's comments around how farmers felt that seasonality and being in nature, and that real connection with nature was fascinating. How our livestock housing tends to, like you say, not be it isn't just acting as shelter, it's kind of leading into production facilities and more in farming. And how do we take those next steps, standardized demands, towards something that is more beautiful? What would you, in an ideal world, like to see, maybe from a policy point of view, to help those things change?
Massive incentivization to get animals back in a natural environment, full stop. The best working environment in the world is already there, outside the shed. And but in terms of the structures design, I think that there are, there's other considerations in there. Like, for example, everyone's talking about tree planting now, but we don't have any policy that really pushes timber in construction. So what are we going to do with all these trees? We're just going to cut them down and burn them. That's not much good in terms of climate change, is it? In France, they've just passed a law which says that from next year, all public buildings newly built will have to be a minimum of 50% wood. So there's a lot of glulam timber and cross-laminated timber used in French buildings, farm and otherwise anyway. But I think if you actually look at that and say, well, if you had to pay a carbon bill for building a massive shed out of concrete and steel, 100 quid a ton, would it be more expensive than a timber one? It probably would. So it's a thing about making people, true cost accounting, I guess, and how do we sort of incorporate the true cost of embodied carbon in buildings and such. We incentivize people to return to a land-based farming. And just in terms of this design thing, just to kind of just tail off what you just said there about beautiful. I think that farmers, in my view, I'm not from a farming background, and I came in misunderstanding a lot of what was going on and being quite disapproving with some of the things that I was seeing as a kind of uninformed consumer. And now I feel overwhelmingly like farmers get a raw deal in terms of they're stuck between, large food corporations and misinformed public, who, with the best will in the world, mean well and are trying to understand all this as well. So I think that the beautiful thing is something really important to me, because I think that farmers obviously have, well, those who have farms rather than just production facilities have access to really beautiful places in their land and their lives, and I think that that's something that they deserve, and I think that I don't see why it's such a giant leap to to design something that people walk into and think this is lovely. I don't think that's an impossible thing. And there's one of my favorite quotes is from the American designer and architect and engineer Buckminster Fuller, who said, when I'm working on a problem, I never think about beauty. I only think about how to solve the problem. But when I've finished, if the solution doesn't look beautiful, I know it's wrong. And that's true. We oversimplify. There's so many beautiful examples of structures in nature, isn't it, that animals build, and we don't look at those. They've evolved to be efficient over a very long period of time. We just build something that's angular, and I don't think it's that difficult to be more ambitious.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. We've got a couple more questions that I just want to have the opportunity to dig into, and then we will finish up. But come back to you, please, Orla, if you're hopefully still there. No idea if everyone is still there because my computer just decided to die halfway through, but there we go. So that you interview, offer an opinion about trial, and was there anything that came out of your... Looks like we may have lost Orla.
No, I'm here, sorry.
Oh, no.
It was breaking up there. I'm not sure if it was just my end or for everyone, but yeah, I can hear you now. Did anyone you have an opinion about trying to milk when the grass will be lower quality? When the grass will be lower quality, in terms of if you're somewhere that isn't suitable in general to grass production, or at a time of year, or under certain
in winter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, winter time.
I think, no, I don't think that specifically came up. I think a certain number of the grazing people, especially the people who were sort of operating an Irish style system where they were very, very focused on grazing, were spring calving, so they didn't milk as much in winter. And definitely that was true in Ireland. Nearly all of them stopped milking in December, January. So that was, sort of milk, grass quality was less important. I think for the quality of the grass came up as massively important for people who had moved away to some extent from a grass-based system. They talked about grass being very variable, the nutrition not being consistent, and so that was a prime reason why people had moved away from grass. And according to some people I spoke to, that was kind of a campaign by feed organisations to frame grass in that way, whereas in Ireland it wasn't talked about really in that way at all. It was down to management. It was all about how you manage your grass. So I think specifically grass in winter didn't come up. I think people who were committed to grass sort of talked about the benefits of grass, and people who were skeptical of grass talked about the problems. So it wasn't, I mean, people did talk about the difficulties of their own system as well, but they kind of championed what they were doing to some extent also.
That's a really interesting paradigm difference, I guess, or like the lens through which you view the challenge. So it sounds like you're saying that in Ireland it's about managing the variables, whereas in the UK maybe it's more about removing the variables, or that, that's how it's being positioned as a solution. So that's fascinating. A question from Martin, who wanted to know about the feed used in indoor systems, and did you find that non-grazing farmers were particularly using grain or soya? And was there discussion around the impact on the environment and nutritional?
Yeah, there was. And again, depending on the system people were in, they had a different view on it. And I think, from my own point of view, this is something I found it quite difficult to get a handle on. Kind of my project wasn't about an environmental assessment of different systems, but there was different arguments made. In Ireland, they very much talked about the carbon in the grassland and the benefits of growing grass and not importing feed. So that was the kind of environmental paradigm they were in. Whereas people who did import feed and relied less on grass talked about how efficient their livestock were, I'm sure you've heard this argument before, that you need fewer cows because the cows are more productive, so you've less methane per litre of milk. So overall, that's more efficient. So again, yeah, there was different paradigms, and I think Nikki's summary was much better than my summary. That really, yeah, kind of people had different paradigms and different ways of looking at it. So it was quite difficult to kind of, people weren't looking at it in the same sort of a way, depending on what system they were committed to. All right.
Brilliant, thanks, Orla. And then we just got one last question from Glenn. So he said, oh, hang on, sorry, I'm trying to get the question up. He says, how is the on getting on board with cows? Has the UK dairy industry gotten into, and it comes down to control? Sorry, was I breaking up there? Could you hear the question okay?
Yes, yeah, and I can read it as well there in the Q&A.
Okay.
So is getting on board and promoting. I think yeah, to me there was sort of an ambivalence, because grazing is still really common in the UK. 80% of dairy farms in the UK graze for some part of the year. I think that's, yeah, a larger proportion of the milk comes from indoor farms because they tend to be much bigger. So and I've seen things, talking about the benefits of grazing, but I think that's still done in marketing as well, to a large extent. But I think, and in imagery also, but there is an ambivalence there, because it was seen that promoting grazing is disloyal, or sort of talking down indoor in some way, or sort of kind of implicitly agreeing with the public that there's something wrong with indoor dairy farming. So I think there was, yeah, it was a complicated issue, I think, for people within the industry to weigh in on. Has it an indifference towards grazing cows because they don't understand the system, and it comes down to control and economics? The people I spoke to who were very, very into grazing, a lot of them were influenced by Irish advisors. They went over to Ireland for conferences and information, or New Zealand advisors, and they said their system is maybe becoming more common among younger people who see it as involving a better work-life balance than 365 indoor, or just a lot of indoor. So I think, yeah, there was sort of they were in their own network, and they were in their own information sources compared to, and they were spring calving as well, like I said. So I think, yeah, they understood the economics differently, and they were like, it's great, grass is really low cost, whereas the higher input farmer said, no, that's nonsense. So there was very different views on the economics of it, and on the benefits or lack of benefits of grass.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Orla, Chris, we're going to finish up in a second, and apologies if my sound quality is really poor. I do apologise for that. But just before we finish, can I ask both of you just a quick question? So Orla, have you got any kind of work that you're doing now? Is this project going any further, or you're now engaged in a different research project? Can you just update us as to what your work is at the moment?
Yeah, at the moment I'm working on a project antimicrobial use, looking in particular at calf rearers, because we tend to involve them less in research. So that's really interesting, getting to speak to people who work in calf rearing. Also other animal disease work as well, to do with surveillance. And I'm still writing up results from this project and still producing other outputs as well.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Chris, have you got any particular resources that you discovered during your Nuffield kind of research period that you think would be useful for folk to explore if they want to look into this in more detail?
I think my work now has become much more about shifting the estate where I work to agroecology, and trying to we've just done a really interesting management accounting exercise led by our owner, Jim Dickinson. And we've just been looking at kind of the profitability of the arable side, and different margins for, we have pigs which eat the waste from the Longley Farm dairy. And we're trying to look at all these elements of the farm and just say, what makes money, what doesn't, what's the picture after BPS, which direction do we need to be going in? And we've been making some pretty big decisions on, we've just done a very big countryside stewardship mid-tier application. We're not waiting for elms, so just putting 120 acres of herbal lays, doing a lot of woodland shelter belt planting to get the place ready for more outwintering. Well, it's a long-term aspiration. That's the direction we want to go in. And we're trying to understand the estate is owned by Longley Farm, and Longley buys milk from a number of other farmers, and we're doing a big carbon footprint audit with some help from Promar for all the farmers in our supply chain, and just trying to understand where we go from there in terms of trying to move, you know, all the farms, trying to not push them, but trying to encourage them towards you know, a more agroecological, well, a system that increases soil organic carbon, and it's interesting just what Orla said there about, you know, sustainable intensification in terms of when you ask some consultants, you say, how do I reduce my carbon footprint? And they'll say, get more milk from a cow, and that makes it less per litre. I think if you actually stand back and say, you know, we'd like to reduce the farm's footprint to negative if at all possible, that doesn't do it. You know, you need to be saying, how do we use these animals to maximize soil carbon and to minimize inputs, and come at it from that other angle, and then what meat or milk results from running that land management system, if you like. So there's some interesting stuff going on there, and I think in terms of my own work, as in the work in this study, we're actually just converting a barn, a large steel portal frame barn on the farm, into a farm education hub, and trying to just understand whether we can do something similar to what Farm Ed have done in the Cotswolds, but in Yorkshire, and you know, really inspired by what those guys have done. The buildings thing is interesting. I'd really like to do more work in that, and there's a couple of people I'm talking to in the Netherlands and Canada to try and effectively shift some agricultural building designs to a more timber and more curvaceous shape, where what happens at ground is still practical, but how can we put a lid on this that looks lovely and feels a good space? So I'm just working on that a little bit at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're going to finish there. Again, thank you both for your time this evening, and thank you as well to our participants for coming along, and apologies if the quality has been a bit dodgy, and yeah, hopefully the recording will be available, but it might have a bit in the middle that disappears. But thanks again ever so much, everybody, and have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Nikki.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.